Okay, for the last part of our lecture, we'll talk about Philippines in the Wallacea. Wallacea is defined to be the region between the Wallace Line in the west and Weber Line to the east. The original Wallace Line delineated the Philippines west of the Wallace Line. But during Huxley's modification of the line, it included all the oceanic islands of the Philippines and to the east of the Wallace Line. Wallace considered the Philippines to be part of the Oriental region, but was separated from the Asian mainland at a very early date. Dickerson, on 1928, actually placed the Philippines in the northern apex of the Wallacean Triangle, while traditionally, the Wallace Line delineated the Asian Biotic region from the Australian region. Well, Dickerson considered Wallacea as a faunal transition zone, largely lacking in numbers and variety of species in Asian and Australian representatives, but is characterized by a significant degree of novel and certain degree of endemism. So Roy Dickerson actually thinks that the Wallacea is a certain zone or certain area. So this certain triangle he called Wallacea is actually a separate region in itself, a transition region that is not part of your mainland Asia and also not part of your Australian biotic regions. So that's what Roy Dickerson's position was, no? So the position of the Philippines with respect to the Wallacea is under certain scrutiny up until now, because under certain studies, as you have read in our reading, it includes several new methodologies, including phylogenetic biogeography, and with incorporation of the tectonic settings and the reconstruction of our archipelago. It is a pan-biogeographic approach too, because it includes different migration or track line patterns, which has been incorporated in the discussion to predict where the lines or where Wallacea really is. So, Wallacea is outlined sharply by the Wallace Line, no? And this area is, in a biologic sense, far more sharply set off than our other areas within the landmass of Eurasia, Africa, the Paleotropical realm. So, botanically and zoologically speaking, I would describe this terrain to be fundamentally Asian with Papuan and Australian overtone. And there is actually a great differences in the geologic history at that time. So the Wallace Line, as you have seen here, was originally named by Huxley, who regarded it as a line of separation between two distinct faunal regions, the Oriental, from the mainland Asia, and the Australian region. So Huxley's data were actually based upon Wallace's work. That's why it was named Wallace Line. And in this connection, it is important to point out that Wallace regarded the fauna of the Celebes, right here, as a mixture of Australian and Asian type. And he thought that in terms of animal life, it was predominantly Australian and is in a more restrictive sense, Papuan in nature. His recognition of the Asian characters of the Celebes fauna is, however, very clear here. So the Wallace Line is modified by several authors, including Huxley and by Dickerson too, and will trace starting from the two islands of Lombok and Bali, Bali Strait, and this line extends northward toward the Makassar Strait, then through Sibutu Channel, then northwesterly through Mindoro Strait, and then northerly along the west coast of Luzon, making a final turn through the Basi Channel into the Pacific. So, the modification of Huxley delineated sharply the Palawan and the rest of the Philippines. While the modification of Dickerson, it is sharply setting off right here. No? It curves right here in the Basi Channel. So, yeah. However, the Weber line, as described here, as you can see here, right here, passes through the Timor Sea on the southeastern side of Timor, then to Arafura and Kay Island, and then it swings northwesterly through the Seram Sea and northerly through the Molucca Strait. So, yep, that's your Weber line right here. Molucca Strait to the Pacific Ocean. So, that's the Weber line. What is the significance of all of these delineations that we are doing? Well, it's actually pretty important because during the delimitation or the delineation of these boundaries, it's a quite frankly an attempt of us to outline an unstable insular area between the two more stable areas at that time. The two more stable continental areas, namely the Sundaland, yes, the more stable Sundaland, and the Papualand. So the delimitation of the Wallacea was largely based on a known hydrographic and geological data. And in the paper, they incorporated a more pan-biogeographic approach. So Wallacea may be interpreted as a more or less a transition zone wherein Asiatic and Australian type mingle with each other. So the general fact of the geographic distribution within the region under discussion is, well, it's a point to a transition zone rather than a simple separating line. This is the take home. You need to realize this, no? All of this delineation that we are doing is not a very solid line. These are abstract line actually. These are not a solid boundary, rather a transition zone. It's not a line to separate. It's actually wrong to do that. But there is certain, merit to it. But you need to keep in mind that all of this are rather a push for a transition zone in the greater triangle of the Wallacea. And as you can see, the northern extension of the Wallace Line between the Philippines and the Borneo proper is not necessarily sharply separated, no? The Asiatic and Australian biotas. And the Asiatic and Sundaland types of both plants and animal are more strongly represented in the northern part of the Wallacea, including species of plants, birds, freshwater fishes, and so on, and the mammals as a whole. So yeah, the process of approximately delimiting this very unstable insular area, this Wallacea, is in an attempt, to delimit it between the two more stable and at a more recent times, the more stable continental areas of your Papualand and your Sundaland. So the delimitation of Wallacea is actually an attempt, to somehow figure out where does your Wallacea lie when it comes to the more stable Papualand and Sundaland areas. That's the actual thing here, no? The fauna and flora of Wallacea are composed of several species and descendants that have infiltrated both from the Sundaland and the Papualand to the Wallacea in itself, no? Within the area, Asiatic type decrease in number and importance as you proceed from the northwest to the southeast. And the Australian type, on the other hand, of course, since it's from the southern portion, decreases too, as you proceed from the southeast to the north and west. So if you actually think about it, the migration lines from the Sundaland, from here, is northward to the Philippines. Sundaland, northward to the Philippines. And for the case of your Papualand, it's more of a southward migration. Okay, so we might compare Wallacea to a narrow-based elongated triangle lying between the Sundaland and the Papualand. The Lesser Sunda Islands and the Timor forming its base, with the Luzon islands as its apex, as you can see here. So the Wallacea is an area, a triangular area, with Luzon at its apex and Lesser Sunda Islands and Timor right here near Papua as its base. So that's Wallacea. And as you have seen in the reading materials, all of this discussion, this academic discussion on the proper area, on the delimitation of Wallacea, is actually backed up by several years and data, including different faunal and floral regions, including your biotic regions in Luzon. And I would like to correct the previous video on the physical geography by Geography Now. This is the Cordillera Central. This is the Northern Sierra Madre. No? Northern Sierra Madre, Southern Sierra Madre. All of these are Sierra Madre. Okay, so there are actually different biotic regions as you have seen in your readings. We have biotic regions in Batanes Babuyan. The Grand Cordillera Central also has a distinct biotic region. We have the Northern Sierra Madre as a biotic region too. And the Southern is actually a separate region. We call the Southern and Zambales as also a distinct biotic regions too. And using these different biogeographic boundaries, these regions of the Philippines, they have concluded where and where which are part of such. Okay? Also, the floral provinces by Merrill actually was also the basis for Roy E. Dickerson's corrections on the Wallace Line. And yes, for this is what I have been talking about. It is actually important that you have for your study the different migration patterns. So the broad takeaway from here is that Palawan and its dependent islands, including Balabac, Cuyo, and the Calamian group, is faunally a constitute of the northern extension of Borneo. No? So as you can see here, Palawan is more or less akin to the Bornean or the Sundaland area because there's a land bridge there. It's connected to mainland Asia nga before, di ba? And the remainder of the Philippines and for most of it is at least a meeting ground of three migration route, namely an old dim trail from Formosa, meaning Taiwan, the renegade province, to the Asia mainland. So there's a old dim trail right here. So something like right here. And a main highway from Borneo, that's the migration route, no? A strong highway from here, Borneo, and a good secondary road from the Celebes right here. So Dickerson actually proposes that the Wallace Line should be extended northerly, no? Instead of easterly, so as to pass between Palawan and the rest of the Philippines, and to separate Luzon from Taiwan or Formosa upon its final easterly swing into the Pacific. So, as you can see here, there are different this is in the reading, no? As you can see here, there are different hypothetical track lines. So we have a strong track line from your, let's say A, from New Guinea, no? From Papua New Guinea to Mindanao to Philippines. So that's a very strong track line or migration route. We have also a route, no, not much of a strong route from your Vietnam to Luzon. And also a route from mainland Asia, Formosa to your Luzon too. And then we have Sumatra to Mindoro Zambales Mountain. We have a solid route from Borneo to Zamboanga. And we also have Sulawesi to, so Celebes, Sulawesi to Central Mindanao route. The interesting part of the discussion in Wallacea also includes the distribution of early man in the Philippines. So this is not just the distribution of certain species of plants and animals, certain floral and faunal provinces, but also includes the different migration patterns, no, or certain groupings of different people back then, including the Negrito, the Austronesian descent, the Proto-Malay that we all came from. But as you can see here by the graph of H. Otley Bayer, we also have scattered Papuan types, no? That is also involved in your regions, no? We have Negrito, Australoid, we have Proto-Malay, and we also have your Papuan types. Okay, so the last portion of the lecture, I would end with the reading materials on the Indo-Pacific corals, because it's been a while. In our discussion, most of our discussion have focused on the presence of biogeographic realms and kingdoms and regions, focusing on the terrestrial environment. But also, those regioning or those boundaries can also be found on your marine environment. For example, for the case of your coral communities, we also have faunal provinces in them. And why do I tell you this? Because the Philippines, aside from us being part of the triangle that is the transition zone, the triangle that is the Wallacea, we're also part of the coral triangle. Yes, we're part of the coral triangle. And we have the center for the marine biodiversity here in Batangas, no? The Verde Island Passage. So as you can see here, we form the apex of the coral triangle too. So the coral triangle is right here. We form the apex of the coral triangle, extending to the Indonesia portion. It's like a different triangle. It's a very different triangle. It includes the Indonesian part and part of your Australia. And we're at the apex of that coral triangle. That's why I want to end with this slide, because it tackles on the different faunal provinces that can also be found on your marine ecosystem. Because it doesn't mean, well, we all know that the marine environment is connected because it's freely flowing, no? The entire ocean, the water is freely flowing. So you can hardly say that the distribution of this marine organism is continuous, but that's not the case. There are actually different faunal provinces too for the case of your marine environment. That's why we have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 clusters, no, of faunal provinces here. And they are delineated by lines after lines after lines. So yeah, this is the Australian faunal province of coral. We have the Indonesia. We are part of the Indonesian coral cluster. The Japan-Vietnam right here. And all the Micronesian island has all their faunal provinces too. And as you can see here, all of this last part of this study, the reading material, actually reflects the uncanny resemblance of these faunal provinces with the geologic features in that area. That's actually the thing here, no? The thing to notice here. There is an uncanny resemblance of your faunal provinces in terms of your geological profile of the area. So yep, that's it. Thank you for listening. If you have questions, comments, and suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below. If you like this video, please leave the thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. And please take your time to browse to all of these videos that I am uploading. So once again, this is Sir Patrick signing off. Peace out.